Awesome.
Here we go.
Yeah.
It's showtime, everyone. Okay, this is the show we call Bring It In. This is True Hoop. That's David Thorpe. This is Chris Ballard. So excited to have you here, live from California, sir. How are you?
Good.
It looks nice out there behind you at 8 a.m. in the morning.
Yeah, we had some rain. It's mellowed out a little bit. Not too bad.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, so let's run your bio really fast here. Nearly 20 years of writing for Sports Illustrated. You've got all the awards, the Best American, not just Best American Sports Writing, Best American Magazine Writing. They don't like sports at that publication, but they like your work.
Yeah. That's because there's only like 5 magazines left, Henry, you see.
That helps. You've always been good with numbers, Chris. You've written 4 books. The most recent one Shot at Forever. Your work's been in the New York Times Magazine. You're teaching at the UC Berkeley Graduate School of Journalism for the last few years. And David and I have just spent the morning reading your work. Just all of they're 70% NBA maybe, just Sports Illustrated features on Titans of Sports. It's delightful, Chris. It's so fun to read your work. My main thought is that the NBA in 2020 is very busy and everything moves very fast. But in the safety of one of your articles, I'm like, oh, this is a way that is very inviting to settle in and focus and really get a sense of what these characters are like. And it's a gift. David, I know you've been similarly enthusiastic this morning.
Yeah, so Chris is one of those journalists that easily could have just decided to play basketball for longer than he did. Maybe not a too long of a pro career. There's lots of good players out there, but when I first saw Chris play, I was very, very impressed. And I think, when you play at the level Chris played, he probably, like me, has an appreciation for certain kind of coaches and systems and everything. And he wrote a piece, the game after Durant blew his Achilles out. Chris, you did a piece talking to Kerr about and to me, it felt like Kerr was still in a fog. The series is still going on. Game 6 hadn't been played yet. And I want you to talk a little bit about just what it's like to talk to in that moment where everyone was questioning everything the Warriors did, and Kerr did too. He was very open with you about where maybe they made some mistakes and what if they could do it again. I want you to maybe talk about that and what it was like to see that as it played out.
Yeah, it was such a weird position to be in going into the Warriors were finished practice, and it was Myers and Kerr. And actually I was with Myers when he got the call about Durant. In the middle of just sitting down, we're just talking in a back room, and he looks at his phone. He's like, oh shit, I got to go. And that was the news that it was what they'd feared. So I was there while Steve was essentially processing this.
Yeah.
And he was torn between this, I don't want to say anything that could potentially damage the team or the institution, or even force the players who are going to play their games to be in a position where they feel awkward. We still want to go forward. And at the same time, like, what are we going to do? This is Kevin Durant. And so, like Steve's one of the best in all sports, anyone I've ever covered, at being able to simultaneously be in his head freaking out and at the same time make it seem like he's not freaking out. And so I think he was compartmentalizing, he was processing, and the team was, they found out within minutes as well. And so I think you guys have dealt with Steve and Bob a fair amount. Both of them have this remarkable ability I've thought about before. They're incredibly successful. They, of course, have large egos, but they have this ability to make it seem as though you're on the same plane. They're just one of us who happens to be, a guy who won NBA titles as a player and a coach and the all-time leading three-pointer. Yeah, but otherwise you're just totally on the same level. And that's the communicative genius that Kerr has.
I completely agree, and I know Henry's got some for you too, but I just want to follow quickly on that, how refreshing that is to, Chris, you were at the top of your profession. It doesn't mean you're perfect. It doesn't mean all your processes are perfect, no. Right? And I'm sure it probably irks you like it does Henry and I when we talk about leaders in general. when they can't admit to being human, when they can't admit to, like, what's going on right now in the world. Doctors every day are still trying to figure this stuff out. Why should politicians pretend as if they know something when none of the experts say they know anything? I think about that when not just you, but when people talk to Kerr and Bob, where they admit that there's a fluidity to this, that we're just trying to figure it out as best we can.
For sure. And like a lot of conversations with Bob, especially, like Bob is, he projects this sort of easygoing nature, but he's incredibly anxious on the inside. This is a guy who used to do the Jerry West thing and pace around the parking lot during the finals games because he just couldn't bear to watch. Other people have other methods. They get on a treadmill, but at least they're watching the game. Like Bob couldn't even watch. So that's his inner turmoil. But he's able to project this, like, I get it. I see the big picture, even if I'm totally focused on this one thing. And he will list off the mistakes they make. And I think that's why the players have bought into the Warriors so much. Is Lacob maybe not so much, right? But Kerr and Myers are exceptional at saying, "Hey, we got this wrong. What do we learn from it?" And you look at plenty of coaches over the years who that's been their great failure. They will just, it was right. It was the player's fault. They didn't adjust. But if they'd only got my system, Kerr's like, I just changed the system. It didn't work, right? So we did what worked. We played to this person's strength.
Yeah.
That's right so David and I love this book called The Culture Code by this guy, Daniel Coyle, who was a guest on the show recently. He quotes this special forces leader who's like one of the sort of revered characters in his book, who says that the 4 most important words in leadership are "I screwed that up."
Yeah.
And
yeah.
There's not a lot of that in the NBA, but you're telling a story about some of that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure those are the 4 most important words in parenting, but I should work on that.
Totally different. We, of course, are perfect.
Godlike figures in your life. Yeah.
We are all Tom Thibodeau.
But players love. First of all, let's be clear. Players that want to be great want to know the person they're with has a good plan, has a good vision, communicates it well. But the best players that I've ever dealt with anyway, they like knowing that you're human and willing to listen and experiment with stuff because they know they're going to ultimately gain even more from it. The alternative is completely fraud. It's complete fraud. If you act like you definitely know everything. I remember a player telling me the issue he had with Vinny Del Negro was Vinny Del Negro kept talking about how tough he was. And I liked Vinny very, very much. But he always would talk about how tough he was. And he was so sure of everything. And he lost the Bulls because they knew, dude, no one knows everything. When you have to talk about being tough, one player said to me, "Coach, when you talk about being tough, you're not tough."
Yeah.
Like that's the one tell. It's one of the things I love about the Warriors when they were really rolling. Draymond maybe a little bit different, but they had a humility to them. And I think that was a huge part of their success. And I thought that article you wrote, Chris, really captured that in that very sensitive moment. I thought you got Kerr being really open about it.
Well, yeah, and Kerr does it consistently. Like rarely does a day go by where Kerr isn't making fun of himself. And he's able to he self-deprecates without trying to invite sympathy. And some people they're sort of looking for a stroke when they're self-deprecating. Kerr doesn't do that. I mean, I think yesterday it was a video of like this cat jumps off, one of those little viral videos. A cat jumps off like a windowsill, and the dog's already like going like this, ready to get the cat, and the cat just jumps over the dog. And Steve's like captioned it, reminds me of my defense when I played in the NBA, like he's constantly making fun of himself. And he does that. They have film sessions and they will intercut like Kerr things. And so, I mean, that trickles down to the players. If your coach can do that in a way that is beneficial to the team, well, then of course the players can do it and they can get on each other. And Draymond, you're right. Draymond certainly liked to always project a certain persona, but he was also very good at ratcheting down the other players. Sometimes too much, obviously. The Durant thing backfired on him. But for the most part, with people who can take that, I think they appreciate it. I talked to Iguodala once about that for a while. The ability of Draymond to center other players through various motivational means.
Well, that Bill Special Forces example, one of the big reasons that he gives for admitting flaws is it empowers the other soldiers to say, "Hey, you're standing in front of a window which could get you shot, right? So if he's standing there talking to people in Fallujah, and one of them recognizes that he's standing in an unsafe place, he needs them to feel empowered to say something, right? Which if they think he's like a perfect God king or whatever, then they'll just leave him alone and be quiet. But they need him to pipe up. So there's also a lot of these stories about co-pilots. The co-pilot from a very hierarchical system, those planes crash a lot more because the co-pilot won't overrule the pilot, right? But if the leader is open to criticism and self-criticizes, then everyone gets to chime in with their best insight, which I think is what's happened on the Warriors, right? Like I know that Draymond is a very big figure in how that team plays defense, right? Because he gets to pipe up because Steve lets him, right? Which is useful to them.
Yeah, without, it's funny, such a fine line. Steve, we used to talk about this. I ended up doing a big piece on them in the midst of that Durant season with the whole back and forth. And actually interviewed Draymond. It was the first interview he did after that scenario. And so Draymond felt a little chastened at the time. And I think what Steve always tried to do was find that line between giving away too much authority. Like if you give away too much authority, or you're giving away too much authority without having earned authority. I think Steve's always been able to fall back on his success as a player and now the success as a coach. And once you have that as like a backstop, you can give more. I think it's harder if you come in, let's say you're, an unknown assistant and you're trying to win a team. It's going to be harder to give out too much early, or they might, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. If there's an assumption that Steve knows what he's doing, he can give more. And then empowering, famous examples, of course, of the players calling plays during games. But a lot of it was like in those team meetings where Steve would talk, or Frazier would talk, or mainly Ron Adams, if it was defense, would talk. And then they usually, he said, Draymond's going to talk anyway. But then we'd call on people. So you knew Draymond was going to talk. So Draymond would pipe up. But then you call on people. Maybe you had to call on Andre sometimes if he didn't pipe up because he was so good. But other people like Looney ended up becoming a pretty strong voice in that locker room before the injury and all that. But that's a wonderful strategy. I'm going to get your buy-in on the front end. So when the game comes and it's time for us all to play together, like you felt like you had a hand in this, whatever it is we're playing in this game. Even if you don't agree with it, you had a say in it.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
How do you, when you talk about that aspect of Kerr, how would you contrast that with like Bud in Milwaukee, who wasn't, he wasn't a great college player. He doesn't have that NBA resume Kerr has, nor has he had he's had a lot of success in the NBA, but you can't even begin to touch what Kerr's done. Is that maybe part of the issue that we've seen in Milwaukee, both in the playoffs last year? Of course, we don't know about this year, that he doesn't quite have that cachet that Kerr's got?
It's interesting. As you guys know, I've known Mike since college.
But can you tell us about those days? Can you take us back when you first met him?
Yeah. So Mike went to Pomona College out in Los Angeles, liberal arts school, small Division III sports school. He was recruited by Popovich.
Right.
Popovich, this was famously his stop before moving up the ladder, various areas. So Mike was recruited by Popovich, but by the time Mike got there, Pop had left. So Mike comes into Pomona, and then I arrived when I was a sophomore when Mike was a senior. And I came in as this transfer student, and I didn't know Mike. I didn't know Popovich. No one knew this name mattered, nothing back then. And my main memory, I've told this many times, but it's so telling of Mike Budenholzer that's worth repeating again, is pickup games, preseason. The guys who were on the team, hoping to make the team, we gather. There's no coaches, just empty gym, right? And in general, there were about 3 or 4 of us who played point guard. But a lot of times, Mike and I would be matched up. And he was the incumbent starter, and I was the guy trying to make the team. And Mike would pick me up full court. And I'm like new to school. I'm trying to make an impression. And I'm like, who is this guy? And he's in his stance, and he's, window wiping back and forth. And, and it was like, is there a point in the game where this stops? No, it was like the whole game.
Wow.
And so eventually it was 2. I would just start passing it up court. I was like, all right, but that's Mike, right? If you're going to do it the right way. Son of a coach, grew up that way, approached everything that way. He would get frustrated with our big men. And you've seen Mike, right? And he'd want to go guard the post players. Like, let me get him. Let me get him. I'll get my ass into him, like that's who he is. And so, Mike's like Mike's appeal to players comes from when you meet him, like he's, you know, like he doesn't like play well on TV, obviously. And he doesn't have like the Kerr charisma, you know, he doesn't have the born authority, but he's one of those guys where he's just a total scrapper and all his intentions are pure. And so the right kind of players buy into that immediately. And you can see it when they do, like, oh, this is my guy, right? And the story I tell him that about Mike that I tell him the Giannis story that I actually heard from Giannis, he said, you know, we're playing the Bulls and it's they're like a terrible team and we go into halftime and you know, Mike's all fired up because we're not playing good enough defense. And so we're in this locker room with like a little shag carpet kind of thing. And Mike says, you got to get on the floor for the effing 50-50 balls, right? And he just dives down on the floor. And they're all worried because it looks like maybe he injured himself. And you know, Mike gets up. And then when I saw him, it was a couple of days later, and he still had like a giant bruise from it. But that's like, it's a different way to win your players, but I think it is just as effective. And I don't know. I'd be curious. I think this year they would have rolled through the playoffs, and any of this sort of like, you know, the Bucks don't have it, that narrative would likely have died, and then we wouldn't talk about it that way. But yeah, I do wonder, like, you know, if you were just like put Durant on that team, I don't know. I don't know if Mike's the right coach for Durant. He'd be the right coach for like Steph Curry, but I think any coach would love Steph Curry. But Giannis is particularly they're sort of simpatico.
Tell some of that. Giannis has some of the, like, he's like, Mike actually jokes about having to literally lock the building so that Giannis will take a day off now and again. He seems very smiley and laid back, but he's actually psycho intense too, right?
Yeah. And so I didn't have a ton of interaction for that story with Giannis. I mean, his agent keeps it like really close, as you guys are probably aware of. But in my interactions with him, it was, you know, I remember sitting, Sam Amick was there too. And the only way we could get a one-on-one with Giannis, because he wasn't allowed to do them, was to say it was team availability, and we both happened to be the only two reporters at practice. So we made a deal, team availability, and we split the time. So Sam asked like his like 8 minutes of questions, and I asked my 8 minutes, and we just didn't use each other's stuff. Sam's a great guy. But what struck me was, we were talking about, like, I hope this doesn't ruin him, this process. I remember feeling this way about Steph Curry early. There's a purity to it, like the competitive purity, the personality, the love of the game is so strong. You don't hear all those auxiliary conversations that often come in, whether it's like the secondary business, or it might be you're worried about money, or there's friction on the team. Like, he was just pure, straight ahead. Like, let's do this. Anyone who keeps a little notebook everywhere and takes notes as they go, as he does, he has this tiny backpack that he wears and keeps a notebook in it. And, like, he took notes like during our conversation. And so, like, all that told me, like, he's like a nerd. He's a basketball nerd who happens to have the most amazing physique created for basketball.
In your story, the first time, so had they already committed to hiring Coach Bud, or when he first met with that scene in the restaurant with the notebook? They'd already hired Bud, is that right?
Yeah, it was the process was in place.
Okay.
But he had to, like, basically Bud had to get buy-in from Middleton and Giannis.
And Giannis has his little Nike notebook, and he's questions about exactly how the offense is going to run, and he's like a PhD student of Budenholzer at this point.
Yes, yeah. And of course, this is exactly what Mike loves. Like, you know, come along with me, son. Right. Let's go talk about positionless motion offense. I think, you know, that was one of Mike's concerns about this, was coming in and, you know, a guy who was like the high priest of 3-pointers, having everyone to shoot all the time from everywhere, and worrying that maybe Giannis would be resistant to that. And of course, Giannis both was and wasn't. You know, as Middleton will tell you, like, I mean, he just dying to shoot. That's all I want to do is shoot threes. But then you get out there in that moment, and then there's the criticism that comes afterwards, and that's different. Like the practice 3-point shooting versus the let's go do it when the game's on the line it's a big contrast.
There's a little line in that story that actually marries the two topics we've already talked about, which is Coach Bud almost became the coach of the Warriors. And then here, I'm going to quote you, only he pushed his vision too hard. I thought he was really smart, but it wasn't going to fit, Joe Lacob says. Bud deems that too kind. What happened there?
I think they're both okay with me talking about this. Because I knew Mike some, he came out to interview for that job, and we met and had beers or whatever. I remember talking to him. And Mike, he blames it on himself to a certain extent. The concept being, he really wanted to run his own thing. He'd been under Pop for a while. And so rather than adjusting to what he was going to come into, he brought the full PowerPoint, like everything.
Full Belichick.
Here's my vision. I got it. I've been waiting 20 years. I learned at the knee of Pop. This is it. We're going to do this. And I think what they were hoping for, and obviously you saw, and some of the directions they went was, they went Mark Jackson, it was Steve Kerr. They wanted more of a, we're gonna coach up these guys, right? Those two are very different coaches, obviously, Jackson and Kerr. But with Bud, he came on so strong, and he also wasn't sure he wanted the job at first. And it was with a little bit, the weeks, months passed, and he was like, oh man, look at that. And then he ends up getting Giannis. So it was it looped back pretty well for him.
Right. It worked out good.
Yeah.
Hey, so you wrote something last postseason about Nelly and how you can see Nelly's fingerprints, in a sense, all through the NBA postseason, whatever. When you were covering Don Nelson as a coach, were you thinking then, as someone who knew the game as well as you did as a player, how different this is? Did you realize this is so unique to the NBA?
With Nelly?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I guess so many of us just grew up with Nelly, and his approach to basketball, and George Karl, it felt more like that. Those were just the great character actors in the movie. They were just being themselves. They're just doing their thing.
They're all Steve Buscemi.
Yeah. That's just, Goldblum being Goldblum or whatever it is. And so that feeling of Nelly was always fun to watch, but I was also happy to be in the Bay Area covering him towards the end when it wasn't so fun to watch, So I prefer to remember the high days of Nelly, because those were so great. And his ability to basically say, whatever this was, a lot of areas of the game and player relations, Nelly's I'm just going to go play shuffleboard and drink 9 beers with the players. We're going to work it out on our own take. He famously did that with Steven Jackson and Baron David. We got it, guys. And that was how the We Believe team bonded early. It was Nelly just being I'm gonna be one of the guys with you. Now let's go do this. Which is so different than how you could pull it off today.
I want to dig into a non-basketball topic that I think relates to basketball, but I did this thing a few years ago at South by Southwest with this Jay DeCherry is his name. He's an expert in human movement, right? And he's one of those people who puts you on a special treadmill wearing sensors, and sort of like P3 does now, but this was before I knew about that. And he basically concluded that the right thing to do is to read Laird Hamilton's book, the pro surfer, who had a bunch of workouts that were just different stuff all the time. He'd paddle board from one island to the other. He'd do these things in the gym. He was constantly changing out. He'd yoga, and no 2 days the like, really. And just a bunch of different workouts. And Jay was like, this is what you want. It trains your brain to make your body healthy. You can do a lot of different activities. We should all be training like that. David Epstein's book Range is sort of similar. It's you want to just keep putting yourself in these different environments to inspire your brain to move a little differently. You wrote about Laird Hamilton, and it was a different thing, but I feel like maybe it's related. So I'm just going to read this little quote. Over the last decade, Tim Woodman, a sports psychology professor at the Bangor University in Wales, has studied the psychological profile of men and women who participate in high-risk sports. He's come to believe that many have a condition called alexithymia, a difficulty in expressing and experiencing emotions. Unable to feel and connect in their daily lives, they instead leap from the sky, climb peaks, and slice down the face of big waves, the better to engage and then conquer the most primal sensation, fear. Is that what we're seeing with your Giannis, your Kobe stories? Are we feeling a little bit of the same thing of this, it's a little bit like, being great isn't exciting enough. We need to be like just crazy over the edge, and that is what's getting Mike Budenholzer diving on the floor at the halftime of a Chicago game. Like,
Wow, I
what I'm
hadn't
saying?
made that comparison. I like that, Henry. What do you think, David? I'm going to pass that one off.
Hey, Chris. You mentioned we did a little sharing before we came on about some of your favorite players that you've covered. Yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the guys that and I've read a lot of other people who have done similar things, especially this time, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. You've done it for a long time. What was and also what was the first year you started covering the NBA? So we get an idea of that timetable, because it's been a while.
And I like your pivot off of Henry's question as well.
That was the fastest exiting of a topic in the history of broadcast. Yeah. The setup was an hour and a half, and the topic was 0
I have to think about it. It is fascinating to wonder what's going on, but that's a to be continued.
Yeah, because the way I thought about it with Laird is a lot of it related to the pursuit of something that could possibly kill you. You're going to get the risk factor as high as possible. I just don't know if that equates to basketball, right? But maybe it does. Think about it.
I guess I think about it like you're gonna have a lot of fun in your driveway with your daughters, right?
Yep.
And that's satisfying. Like you can, at the end of the day, like fall asleep thinking like, oh, like a good day, right? Like I think maybe if you're Giannis, you would not check the box. You'd be like, nope, I didn't feel that in the same way that you and I might, right? He needs to do more, which is why they have to lock the gym, right? Maybe, or that part in the Alex Honnold movie that I'm sure we all saw. What the heck's it called? The big rock climbing.
Free Solo.
In Free Solo, they look at his brain and basically like he just isn't feeling it like we're feeling it, right? Like he's like hanging out with his girlfriend is like, that's cool, but like I'm gonna go up there, right? I think maybe, I don't know, I feel like there's a little bit of some of the athletes that we cover strike me as a little bit like that. Or one other example that comes to me was Jason Kidd was like, I found out that Pilates was helpful, so they said it was good to do an hour, so I was like, make me a program for 3 hours. It's like, well, why would you do that?
It might be a great way to watch the Jordan documentary coming up with that in mind, Henry. Just that whole, just hearing people talk about this amazing documentary to come. I'm gonna try to watch it with that point of view.
Thank you.
Yeah, and now I see where you're going with that, and I think you're right. There's that element. So Tim Duncan, I remember when I interviewed him, and it took forever to get this interview with Tim Duncan. This is 2012. I think 3 years, and
oh wow.
And finally, like it was like he tried to cancel the day of, and still weren't sure about what was going to go on. We talked about a bunch of stuff, but one of the things I remember was asking him about the things that stuck out to him during his career. And like the guy's incredibly successful, and he started talking about the games he'd lost. The most successful player of the previous decade, unimpeachable in so many ways. And he starts telling me these stories about shots and games lost and how they aided him. So that's the kind I agree. That's one of those things you think about is, you could, like these players, Steph Curry could make, I don't know if he, maybe, I don't think his personality type is set to dwell like that, but there are the dwellers who are like, okay, because that didn't work out, I need to work X times harder rather than stopping to enjoy the moment. Steph's actually pretty good at enjoying the moment. I think that's one of his, I'm shocked at how he can do both, be obsessive and enjoy the moment.
For sure.
And actually, I want to, because I see you guys have comments here. Jared Hector had a very good question on the chat.
Yeah.
And I agree with him. I don't think
Wait,
those
Chris,
two
this is a
things
joke.
are.
A joke of this show is that I keep forgetting to tell people to put their questions in the comments, and this is the first where the guest is doing it before I am.
Well, why wouldn't Chris do it? He's controlling everything else. He should be doing this too.
If you're available every day at 11, Chris, I'm just
I spend way too much time on Zoom as teaching now, so a lot of the I'm way too.
Gerard's on our show every day, Chris. He'll
Yeah.
finish. But go ahead and answer the question. It's a great question.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, and I don't think those two are mutually exclusive. Jared's making the point about just because people talk about their off-court business interests doesn't mean they don't love the game or aren't basketball geeks or nerds. And that's 100% true. Like LeBron loves the game, and he has these other things. I think there are examples where that's not the case. Certainly, we can point to those people where that's where it maintained that. And so, actually, one of the guys to sort of dovetail these questions together, that to me, Jamal Crawford was someone I'd heard about for years and years in covering the league, and everyone's like, Jamal's the best. And I didn't know him. I never really covered him. So my impression was Jamal's the worst because I just really disliked his game from a basketball standpoint.
Kind of a ball
didn't
hog.
play defense, just dribble. I didn't feel like he made players around him better. And then I ended up doing a story near the end of his career on Jamal, and he totally won me over. And then I talked to people around him everywhere, and like Doc Rivers said the same thing. I expected to hate this guy, and then I ended up loving him, right? And I talked to this GM who's like, I don't want him on my team, but when he retires, I'm totally hiring him for the front office.
Yeah, because you can't dribble anymore when you're an executive. No more dribbling. That is perfect.
Good point. But Jamal is one of those guys, so he never had any other interests. I think, like, if you just talk about purity of just like a baller, I think that was actually the name, like the last of the NBA's ballers, which is a little hyperbolic, but that was the name of the story. But that was that's all, like, he's still doing it every day. He will, like, after when he got married, their reception was like a 3-hour pickup game that night at like midnight with all his friends. Like that's what he did. Like the guy, like that purity of love. And so there's a scale of that, right? And it's not to say that LeBron and KD don't have that same purity and can do the other stuff. Right. Some people can multitask, but some it goes different directions, right? And I love seeing those, like Jamal, who can go however many 20 years and maintain just that. Yeah, I'm sure whatever he's doing right now during the lockdown, it involves shooting a basketball somehow.
Yeah, I don't like the idea, to Rod's point, that one is like inherently better or something, but it is like definitional of Giannis, right? There was a moment, I wasn't around Giannis very much because he plays in Milwaukee, but they were in Philadelphia, and I stood there, and he basically yelled in a joyous way, like at the assembled Milwaukee press corps, and was basically like, you guys, like, I tell you the secret of life all the time. Stay off social media. Hang out with your family. Like, play basketball. That's it, right? And everyone's like, oh, God, here he goes again, right? But, like I think if I got the feeling that if they wrote that every time he said it, they would write it every day, and it would be weird. But that is not what LeBron says, right? That isn't, like, LeBron has a giant bunch of obligations to Nike and a school in Ohio. And he's, we know that he manages his things very well, and in the playoffs he doesn't go on social media, etc. But he's blatantly, publicly doing a lot of different things. He has a lot of different roles. He's a dad, he's a husband, all these things, right? Giannis isn't that guy. Like, Giannis is a guy who is not on social media and is overtly spending, or barely on social media, just giant chunks of his day being that nerd, right?
Yeah, there's players, there are some guys that that's just all they ever want to do. I have a guy in the G League who's living in Washington, and he was able to get into a private church gym to work out 4 days a week. No one's allowed in the gym. It's completely isolated. And I said, do you walk there? And he said, no, it's a 2-hour drive. And he's like, but coach, honestly, that's all I want to do is play basketball. This guy's a very, very talented player. I think he'll be in the NBA a long time. He actually reminds me a lot of Chris Middleton. And that's just who he is. He just wants to play ball. He watched a million NBA games growing up, which a lot of players don't do that. Some guys just have that makeup of it. That's just all they want. That doesn't mean they don't get other passionate interests when they get older. He's, in his early 20s. In fact, that typically does happen. When they take the ball away, you got to do something else. But yeah, some guys are just, and I watched LeBron. Henry asked me to look for a YouTube, Instagram thing on Curry, but I didn't listen to him. And I looked for one. I found one on LeBron. And he was playing cards with his family while he was on Instagram. I've never seen Instagram live before. This was a recorded version of it. And LeBron, it's actually pretty funny. he sees a million people comment, and he's like, "What up, world?" And I don't know who it was playing with him, but they were like questioning him. And he's like, "No, I'm just asking, like, what are they all up to?" Like, he really genuinely wanted to know what was happening while he was playing cards with his family. I love that about LeBron. Not everyone's that way. Not everyone's cut out that way. That's just unique to him. And he's got some authenticity to it because he's doing some pretty amazing things with that school, for example. Like, you can't just give them money. He is a source of inspiration for them. It's meaningful. It's real. Yeah.
We should take a second to talk about Train Like a Pro. So we all go down to IMG. Who is like Ryan Russillo,
John Gavoni,
Steve
Kyler, Roland Beach,
Beach,
Eric Weiss.
Yep.
Levian.
Aaron
Jason
Barzilai.
Levian. Wait,
Aaron Barzilai, right?
Aaron Barzilai.
Yeah.
Right. Steve Kyler.
Myself, there was one other person I feel
Steve Kyler.
Yeah, I said
Ingram.
Bill Ingram.
Bill Ingram, yeah.
So we get there and we all think we're pretty good, right? And then David puts us through like every single person he can find within 100 miles who can make us tired, gets a chance to make us tired. We don't play any basketball. And then it's like, do a one-handed floater, and they all miss, right? And then at some point, we actually play basketball. We are like 3 days wrecked. I'm telling the story with full of lies, but basically, like we can barely
lost a
walk,
bunch of weight,
let alone jump. Yeah, we've lost weight. I couldn't walk up the stairs to the rented condo I was staying in. But in that environment, in my recollection, Chris freaking Ballard
he's really good.
can do every single thing on the court perfectly. His handle is smooth and crisp. His passes are on point. He never misses a shot, even though he takes them from all over the place. His release.
I prefer your recollection, Henry. This is
right hand, left hand.
My recollection.
And it's all just like, oh, okay. Like we are all actually. I think a little bit about the parents sitting next to me at some music competition I went to. Everyone's doing in performance, and some kid goes, and then the parents are like, second place, not bad. Like they're just rooting for their kid to get second place.
Right.
Like Chris is a very good basketball player and a delightful, selfless, gives up the ball. His team, I bet, wins all the time. So I just want to hats off to you, sir.
Well, thank you, Henry. Some of my main recollections of that, the concept, if people watching are familiar with it, was essentially it was like take some media down there and just wear them the hell out so they have a better appreciation for what NBA players go through and people aspiring to the NBA. And I'm shocked in retrospect. How was it, 4 days that we weren't all injured by the end of it? It was absolutely grueling. And then Thorpe was like the overlord of our camp, running us through these drills where we're like strapped into chains and doing like pulleys and like endless box jumps. And I even just visualize it in my head now at age 45. And it hurts just thinking about it. I'd last like 2 minutes. But it was an amazing experience if you are going to cover the league, to have had that formative time to get an appreciation. Like even like I played low level college ball for a year, right? And a lot of us played high school ball. And that's different than what these guys are doing. And just getting a minor glancing appreciation for it, that was super helpful.
Yeah, these guys are, I mean, listen, their capacity for dealing with pain is very, very high. I think that's something people don't always get. The other day, my son, who's only 18, but he's a very, very serious player, like I'm sure you were, Chris. And I said, hey, you want to go do an ab workout with me? And he said, mine or yours? And we are not competitive at all. I don't ever try to beat him in anything. I always want him to win. I'm his biggest fan. And I said, well, I mean, I think I could probably do yours. He's like, no, you can't, Dad. And he's right. Yesterday, my daughter and I did my workout, and we watched my son do his. And there's a world of difference. He's trying to play high level basketball, and it's just another level. But I know Gerard's going to come on here soon, Henry. I want Chris to talk about some of the amazing guys besides Jamal Crawford that you covered.
Okay.
I would say from a journalist standpoint, if you're doing this, you're always looking for someone who is both thoughtful and able to articulate what it is they do well. And there's certain players where you need the people around them to articulate it for them. And like, it's that rare moment, like Shane Battier is like the gold standard for that. Someone who was really good at this thing, defense, and really, it's really teamwork. It was his other strong
Right.
skill, and he could tell you exactly why. And I remember I read a book about basketball, and I put a chapter in on Shane Battier and how he sees defense. And it was like sitting down with a professor. Like we sat at a desk, and I just like he started showing me stuff, and then he's taking me all around the room and describing it to me. And I basically just rolled tape, and then Shane talks, and those are great. And so those are the kind of players that we all gravitate towards as journalists, and you find that. But the ones that often are rewarding are the ones where during your conversations with them, you see them. I mean, Shane's explained all that in his own head 1,000 times. He explained to other reporters 1,000 times. It's when you can reach that, like the ones who are, I guess, emotionally vulnerable in a way, which is really hard to be if you're that successful and that many people ask you questions all the time. And that was always, to me, one of those, like the real privileges of the job, was getting to a point with someone where they might talk about their process and their approach to something and let down their guard. And so, over the course of the years, there were some players who've done that. There's some coaches who've done that. And the ones that I remember most are ones like Ryan Anderson, that really opened up after his fiance died by suicide. I did a story on him, and watching him sort of go through that process in his own head. It's really hard for someone to be that vulnerable and then go out on a court and face off against people all the time, right? Monty Williams, sort of very, just terrible scenario again, and his ability to be self-reflective in those moments. Those ones were rewarding. And then the ones that were just always amazing to talk to. Kobe was always amazing to talk to. I think we all know that, because he could put into words what he was doing, right? And then there's other guys like Chuck Hayes that I just loved. Chuck Hayes was just, I think, if you loved grinders, you loved Chuck Hayes. And then the Duncan experience. I wish Duncan, for the sake of fans, had opened up a bit more during his career, because he's exceptionally funny, and you don't see that. And my favorite Duncan moment from that interview was probably when we were talking about Kevin Garnett. And this is near, I'm trying to sort of get Duncan to a place. I'm like, all your battles over the years, I know you guys had your back and forths and all that, but, was it almost like you and Garnett formed a kinship of sorts? Duncan sort of looks at me, he pauses, like, define kinship.
Clever dude. What was
So
it?
then
What
what'd
was
you
it like
say?
with Dirk?
Wait, what'd you say?
Yeah.
I gave it a shot, and I
Yeah.
had heard stories. I talked to people around him, and he just left it there. I think, he's very
That was
good
his
just
answer.
leaving it there.
That was his answer.
That's a
What
hell
about
no.
Dirk? What about Dirk and Nash?
Dirk and Nash, I mean, once again, I think when every journalist loves covering someone, there's usually a good reason. And I think both those guys fall into that category. My recollections of Dirk, where he was incredibly awkward early on, and Nash was the one who sort of brought him in. They would have these crazy competitions in Nash's apartment where they'd play like indoor soccer in the apartment, kicking the ball off the walls. And then Nash would lead them, this is in their younger days, on this like scavenger hunt through town where you had to jog from bar to bar and have a beer and like play a game at the bar. And the rest of them thought it was gonna be fun. But then Nash would go like super hard and he'd sprint from bar to bar. And so Dirk told me the story, like we're exhausted. We finally get to the last bar, and it's got like, there's an outdoor area with like a pool, and Nash is out there doing laps. Like that was,
Jeez.
and so those guys, like at every stop, you'd see them grow. The last interview I did with Dirk was like 2 years before he retired. And he had, much like we're talking about with LeBron and others, he'd get to that point where he'd become more reflective and can look back on things and open up a bit. But he'd also developed that wonderful humor, right? I think that's the ability to connect across all these players over the years. Like, I don't know about you guys, but I don't think I ever met anyone who didn't like Dirk.
Everybody likes Dirk.
Yeah.
Yeah. Chris, you have been doing you have a family shooting game that takes place in the driveway, which has very specific rules and used to involve Michael Jackson. Can you talk us through this so we can join your religion?
So any of the people who are out there who have kids, this is a great game to play with kids. My daughters are 7th and 5th grade. It's something I used to do with my brother growing up a lot. And so take a song, any song works. We used to use Man in the Mirror. I don't use it with my kids because they're not, different feelings about whether they're listening to Michael Jackson or not, especially where I live in Berkeley. And so we would use Man in the Mirror, long song. It has breaks in it where there's sort of natural pauses where there's that change moment. So, it's about you're about 2/3 the way through when you hear that. And so what you do is you shoot 3-pointers and you alternate. You can do between 1 and 4 people, and you're shooting with 4 people, you shoot 3 at a time. And if you hit the last 2 of those, each one's worth 1 point. If you hit the last 2 of your 3-pointers, you keep shooting. And if you hit 7 in a row, they start becoming worth 2. And so you're trying to see how many points you can accrue over the course of the song. The other players rebound and feed the ball. And so a lot of it becomes about, can you get a good rebound? Can you get a good pass? Seamed up for the player, catch in the pocket, because they're getting in a rhythm. And what you're looking to do is the one guy is just shooting, and you can rack them up and get on a run and get your point total up higher. Now, if you get a bad long rebound, whatever it is, you got to chase it down, pass it. You rotate as you go. So if you're doing 3 players, usually you have 1 rebounder and then one for like a long rebounder.
Right.
And then after the second shot, he rotates in and you go. And you do this and it becomes addictive. And you're always trying to see, like, okay, that's the 3-man record. Let's get a 4-man record. So yes, now I'm sure like all of us were making do. I've got like a tiny little patch of asphalt and one of those kids adjustable hoops. But my daughters and I are playing. We choose different. They choose the song, and we try everything from that Shakira song or whatever. It's like you pick something and you try to get as many points as you can. And I think that's like you were talking about, David. You do what you can in these moments.
I like that better. That and I've even written about a couple of games that we play with our players. Ways to work on their game for shooting. I like that better than horse because it's got music.
Yeah.
Do the same thing. If you get NBA players to do those things, you can have their own baskets and put on music. It'd be fantastic. I love seeing stuff like that. It's super fun.
So basically you get 3 attempts to get hot. You get 3 attempts to get on a streak, right? That's basically what's happening. And
you're hoping to at least hit 2 of them to maintain your total score. If you're averaging 2, you're going to get a pretty good score. You need a couple runs to really boost the score up, but maybe it's just one of you's hot and one of you's not, but the other guy can get 2 out of every 3. And if you do it by yourself, it's a fantastic workout because you're self-rebounding, dribbling back out, and basically taking like you're coming off a screen each time, and you have to pop leg strength, back up, get a good release. And by the end, your shots are a little bit short, so maybe you're taking a little more time on the shot. But yeah, it's.
So you and your brother, Man in the Mirror, what's your score?
Depends. If indoor, outdoor, it's a lot of factors. Like if you're looking to get from with two, like we're both pretty good shooters, like 40 to 60 is like the range you're going for there. And you can bump it up higher, especially if someone like my brother's got a really nice stroke. He might roll off like 25, 26 points on one run, right? Which is a lot, right? But you spent years doing that same thing, get good passes, et cetera. Or you could just be a total disaster and then you immediately restart the song.
And then you look at the Man in the Mirror.
Yes.
I don't think enough people would read it probably, but although I definitely would, so my brothers, but there's a book for every set of brothers I've ever known has that story. Just a different game. I played a totally different game with my brother Mike, who's, now he's going to be 53 this month. But right now, if I called Mike on the phone and said, hey, do you want to go play? We called it the Seminole game because we were from Seminole and we were in middle school. We wanted to make the high school team, which we did. So we pretended to be high school varsity players when we were, 12 and 10. If I called him and said, let's go play the Seminole game, he'd be so fired up. We did this a million times, all the time. Every brother has some. Imagine the book of amazing games brothers or sisters make up. It'd be so cool to see.
And I wonder what would the Cuomo's game be?
Oh, right. Yeah, maybe they didn't play basketball. Did they play?
I don't think so. I know Fauci did. Ben Cohen wrote a really good story about how Fauci was a scrappy little point guard.
Yeah, we want to get him on the show. I told Henry, he's the point guard. We got to get him on the show.
Yeah, all the point guards have to come on the show. It's funny. I'm thinking about, what would my sister and I, what would our game be? And then it's the stupidest game ever. We're children of divorce, and they were lived far apart, but we split time. So my sister and I grew up in a car. And we played, we invented the stupidest game ever called What's That? Where you point at something and say, what's that? And the other person has to answer. You have to be honest about what you were thinking of. And it has to be that you pointed at it, but you have to be creative, right? So the original version was like, what's that? And it's like, oh, that's a barn. It's like, no, the windshield. Right? And we would just like do little mind tricks on each other for like an hour. It was like this stupid, like, yeah. We only had an 8-track player in that car, so we were like desperate for.
Right.
Okay, we're overtime. And Chris, I still haven't. People are gonna want to know. You tweeted that you no longer work at Sports Illustrated, but you're doing a million things. Catch us up on that.
Yeah, actually, I appreciate you guys bringing me on. It's been great to talk about something other than what's going on in the world right now. And that's I'm actually going to transition at 9 here to I'm working at the Cal Journalism School. And
I'm keeping you way late. I'm super sorry. We were going to let you go early. Do you have to go right now?
It's good. I got a couple minutes.
I'm sorry.
But go read the Times because they have partnered with the journalism school, or actually more like we partnered with them to produce coverage in California in some of these areas that it's harder to get out to and get real assessments of what it's like in these counties. And so the journalism school students are doing work under team leaders, and we're pushing up at the Times. First story ran on Monday, and so we have more coming out. And so for the students, it's an amazing opportunity, right? So they get a possibility like a Times byline to see how it works, and for the Times, it allows them to reach out into these other communities. So the group I'm working with, our area is the elderly homeless. They're the most vulnerable population, especially in the Bay Area, as you can imagine. But in the state of California, they're anticipating that 60,000 homeless people will be hit by COVID. And so, how do we prepare for that? And so in the Bay Area, for example, there's only one senior shelter. And even that senior shelter is now in lockdown. So essentially there's 11 people in that shelter. And then the rest of the elderly homeless, 75, 80, whatever it might be, are in the same shelters as everyone else. There's not like there's a ton of social distancing going on, incredibly vulnerable population. So it's stories like that that we're doing, and students are amazing. And in a time like this, having something to sort of focus on other than being scared all the time is also a secondary element of it.
Are you a good Zoom teacher?
No, as you can tell.
I bet you're great. Fine. I am so sorry that I kept you way longer than planned. We'll let you go as soon as you want to go. We're going to have Gerard on because it's like a tradition that he asks a question on video every time. Hang out if you want to, and if you have to go, thank you so much. More than understand.
Thanks, guys. It was awesome.
All right, man.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Chris.
Hey guys, what's up?
Yeah, Chris, 100 apologies. He basically was like, I have to teach this class. I have to go at 35 past the hour, and I just
good.
I forget a lot of things. Turns out.
I actually had a good question for you too, Henry.
Perfect.
And David, I think I probably know your answer because, But anyway, how you guys found that especially you, Henry, as a journalist? How has your ability to see the humanity of the people you talk to changed from when you started till now, so late in your career, right? Because I think oftentimes what gets missing is the reason why these people are so popular is because they can put a round ball through a net, right? And that's how we see them in those sort of one blocks. But as we know, they're so different and they have many layers and complicated, tragic stories, bad stories, good, bad, all that. How has that changed for you from beginning to now?
I think when I was new, you just don't get to know anybody very well, right? And so you have to really worry about like this quote, right? Like somebody said this thing, and that might have and the whole newsroom gets crazy with the like, that's a news story and that's a headline. That's not like, and I literally don't care about any of that anymore, right? Like to me, I'm like, what's Mike D'Antoni really like? Right. And like, for a certain number of people in the league, like you get a real sense of that. Actually reading Chris Ballard's work, you get a real sense of that, right? Where it's like, every movie is about somebody in struggle, right? Like who's in struggle? What are they working on? What do they really care about? Not who has a new shoe or, it's fine to care about that, but I'm interested in like the soul, right? Like, not the SOLE, the SOUL, right? So to me, I feel like feel blessed that for some short list of the people, a lot of whom have been on this show, like I feel like, I know what this person's really like, right? And living in this kind of underground community of that is a delightful version of the NBA, as opposed to, you know, I feel for beat writers starting out now have to really sweat the, like, you know,
Yeah.
the star said this and now that's what we're all going to work on for 4 days. Like it feels pretty hollow.
It's terrible. It's because it's not like it's nothing. You're just talking, which is again why I don't stand in scrums. So I'm like, this is stupid. Like I don't, like there's nothing good here. Like,
yeah.
So
it's also not popular. That's the other
right,
thing.
yes.
I've seen the data. Like those stories don't, like, you know, if LeBron says something outrageous, then okay, that's one like kind of AP style scramble that might lead to real traffic. But all the rest of it, like nobody cares what the third best player on the Bucks says. Like literally nobody. Like nobody cares. Like
nobody cares.
Who was that third player? Bledsoe?
Well, gotta be Bled, I guess, right?
That's how my brain works.
Yeah. Brook Lopez?
Right, yeah.
I don't know.
Bled or kid from Villanova. I can't think of his name.
Could
off
be
the top of my head.
DiVincenzo.
Yeah,
Bledsoe was
Dante
better this year.
Yeah,
he was good. Dante had a big year this
Yeah,
year,
yeah.
but Bledsoe was better.
Brook Lopez, though. Brook Lopez.
Oh, Lopez twin.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with Bledsoe being the third best.
Let me settle that.
Well,
So that's your headline, Gerard. Third best player on the Bucks.
If they were going to win the title this year, Bledsoe had to be better than he was last year in the playoffs. He was awful last year.
Right. That's why people weren't sure that they were going to do it. I really like what Chris said, where he thought they'd roll through the playoffs. I don't disagree in the East. I mean, there's always going to be challenges and injuries can always come, but they were clearly the best team by a huge amount in the East. Beating the Lakers or the Clippers, I mean, I wouldn't tell you they would definitely do it. To me, it was best 50-50. Those are phenomenal teams, and I think Milwaukee is too. I do.
Yeah.
But Bledsoe has to play really well for sure.
All right, you guys. Thank you so much. That's fun. Thanks, Chris. Sorry I ruined your day. We will be here again tomorrow. As always, thank you, David. Thank you, Gerard. Thank you, everybody.